And now to the latest terrorist attack in Russia, this time taking place in Dagestan. It's the second terrorist attack on Russian soil since March 22nd, when ISIS terrorists killed 145 people in a concert hall in Moscow and injured over 550.
So what is behind this latest attack? Is Russia starting to crack at the seams? Joining us to discuss is Sergei Erofeev, sociologist at Rutgers University. Hello, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good to have you back.
Hi, Don. Hi, Sasha.
Yes. Looking at this latest attack in Russia, in Dagestan, what are your thoughts? We see mainly police officers killed. We don't really know of any claims necessarily, although the Russian authorities are saying that it is a foreign terrorist organization. What conclusions can we draw from this terrorist attack so far?
Well, Don, we already hear that some pro-Kremlin commentators say that it was all orchestrated by the West, whatever is meant by the West.
Or Ukraine.
But not a governmental statement, that's true. It's really striking that since the Chechen war, never that number of police officers has been killed, 15 police officers. It's just striking, even compared to the huge, massive terrorist attack in Moscow in March this year. So what can be said about the organization behind it is unclear. We have various signals, as you know, that it might be the Islamic State in general and its Caucasian chapter in particular. So what happened in Moscow just recently was also reported to the Kremlin by the Western intelligence community as orchestrated and planned by the Islamic State. And we know perfectly well that the Kremlin would rather funnel this all towards its named enemies in the West. Of course, they are not true enemies for the Kremlin. They are trying to play chaotic games, and they are trying to benefit from anything which actually endangers the Russian people. What is behind that really is a very serious organization. And what the Kremlin is not really taking into account is that there are always pressures outside of its control. And these pressures have its own agency. There are groups in the world, there are movements which don't care whether Russia wants to be with China, with America. They have their own interests. But the Kremlin has its own interests, and it continues to play the same game of survival. So like it happened 24 years ago when Putin tried to persuade the Russian population that everybody needs order and so-called vertical of power. Now the same guy is actually getting things out of control. So we observe one thing which can be defined with one sociological term, and the word is disorganization. So whatever Putin tried to sell to the public and to the rest of the world decades ago as establishing order is actually going out of control, and he's facing disorganization, although he's definitely not keen to acknowledge it.
Can we rule out a false flag in this instance?
Well, like in the case of Moscow, the Moscow attack in March this year, I think a false flag is highly unlikely. What is more likely is always that there are social and political forces around the globe which have, as I said, their own agency. So in the case of Moscow, what the Kremlin can do, which might prompt some people to think of a false flag operation, is that the Kremlin is always trying to benefit from whatever the situation unfolds. So it will definitely try to benefit from the situation in Dagestan, which does not necessarily mean that FSB or whoever governed by Mr. Putin is actually responsible for all these detailed operations. What is really more likely, as I said, disorganization. The things are not really as orderly as the person who came to power in Russia 25 years ago is trying to portray.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting point. You said a lot of pressure, Sergei. You said a lot of these forces have agency. There's an interesting quote here. I believe Putin said this in March after the Crocus Hall attacks. He said that he insisted, and I quote, "Russia cannot be the target of terrorist attacks by Islamic fundamentalists because it demonstrates a unique example of interfaith harmony and interreligious and interethnic unity." Now, we've had this strike here, and as you said, is this something that Putin just cannot control anymore? Has he lost control? I mean, he guaranteed security for his people for so long. Is this just a consequence of everything falling apart? As you said, these agency forces across the world, Islamic State, elsewhere, is it just a part that there will be more of this, that he just cannot admit, that he cannot keep Russians safe in any regard?
Sasha, saying that things are falling apart sounds stronger than the word disorganization. Disorganization is a slow process. It has been going on. The first signs of that we saw already in the first half of the 2000s. Like, let's just remember the protests of pensioners, so-called retired people in Russia in 2005. And then in 2011 and 12, Putin got a new kick to try and put a tighter control on his society, because people do have their ideas of how to live and how to organize better life. So the civil society in Russia, I mean, the democratically minded people, those who want liberal democracy, it's one thing with their agency, but there are also the forces of fundamentalism and traditionalism. And definitely the region of Caucasus is a very good breeding ground for some of that, for the international networks of the Islamic State. So these things exist, and one shouldn't put a blind eye on that. And for the Kremlin, it's always an information game. So whatever Putin says, it's always a lie. This should be an axiom. If he says that there is a harmony between the religions in Russia today, it should be taken at least with a grain of salt. Whatever he says that the Islamic State cannot attack us, it's a complete lie, because the Islamic State is something else. It's not the people of Tatarstan or people of Dagestan who want to live in peace and harmony and to be a normal modernist consumers, not wanting the war in Ukraine. That's true, but there are other forces which are trying to use the situation, including the situation in Dagestan, and we know how unstable that can be sometimes. Remember the presence, the proximity of Chechnya. And although Chechnya has been in an alliance, in a criminal alliance, I mean the government of Chechnya with the Kremlin, the Chechen people have their own desires. The majority of people in Chechnya want to live like any other normal people in peace and prosperity, well, assuming that behind that should be some democratic development, even for Chechnya. But there are other people in Chechnya, in Dagestan. It's definitely the absolute minority, but they can be activated in certain situations by those who have certain power across borders. So these groups, they want to show with an act like this that they do have power. Nothing could be really achieved this time with cutting the throat of the Orthodox priest and burning the synagogue. But these groups want to show that they exist, that they are persistent, and that they have their power, whether it's Putin or the United States of America and whatever.
Sergei, but I'm curious about that, because there is, I mean, this happened on the eve of this Orthodox Pentecost, I believe. So, and there were casualties that were the Orthodox casualties. I think this very much goes at one of the things that Putin tries to defend, which is the Orthodox faith. Is this, in your mind, in your estimation, is this going to be used again, as we know very likely, by Putin and the Kremlin to spin a different narrative? I also have this comment from Sergei Melikov, who is the head of the Republic of Dagestan, saying very much that Ukraine, on a Telegram video, has been involved in the attack, and Dagestan was now directly involved in Russia's war in Ukraine. So how do you see this play out? Is this also an attack on the spiritual core of Russia, and how is Putin going to play this?
Well, again, Putin is a capo di tutti capi, the central mafioso figure. And for him and for his culture, for his mafioso culture, the main principle is anything goes. So whatever needs to be said as a lie, he will do that. Whatever needs to be done in terms of alliances with whoever, with Iran, for example, he goes for that as long as his main interests are served. And then his main interest is, of course, to stay in power. The war in Ukraine is not a goal in itself for him. It's nothing to do with alleged imperialistic ideas and trying to be a great leader for the whole world. Not at all. The answer is very, very simple. Stay alive, stay in power, because otherwise the Russians will overthrow you and you will face totally unbearable consequences. As to the people of Dagestan, one thing should be remembered here, that Dagestan is a very, very strongly anti-war region in Russia. So the majority of Dagestani people, well, at least greater percentage than in any other region, even in Moscow and St. Petersburg. So Dagestani people are very, very strongly opposed to the war in Ukraine. This may raise some more suspicions about conspiracy and that the Kremlin wants to sow more chaos in Dagestan. I personally don't take it too seriously. So, but that factor is very important, that Dagestan is a seriously anti-war region in Russia.
Yeah, I don't know if I find it ironic. Perhaps I do. But recently, Vladimir Putin has said that, well, there's been this push to redefine the nuclear doctrine and to ease some of the restrictions and make the use of nuclear weapons a little bit more, I guess, easier. But also, Vladimir said something along the lines that if Russia fails in Ukraine, the very existence of the Russian state may therefore be in danger. And I believe he alluded to the fact that maybe Russia, certain regions of Russia could disintegrate from the larger Russia itself. And then an incident like this happens. Any conclusions between these two incidents or these three incidents be drawn?
Well, it's a good question, Don. These are two different things, of course. And talking about the nuclear threat and nuclear blackmail, we should remember the whole history of these 2+ years, how Putin would regularly allude to his possibility to destroy the West, or at least Ukraine, if his interests are seriously hurt. Then something happened that probably China tried to persuade Mr. Putin that you shouldn't really play so much with that rhetoric. But already then it was clear that whenever Mr. Putin feels more fragile, he would come back to that sort of blackmail, which doesn't mean at all that he will resort to using even tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, which would be just completely self-destructive. Mm-hmm. Sociologically speaking, I again refer to my old conception, which means that he can only use nuclear weapons in the absolute situation of being cornered. Even defeat in Ukraine will not mean that Mr. Putin is cornered or anything happening in the Caucasus. It can only happen when he's really on the brink of death.
Right, so you said as well, like this is a disturbing incident, but as well as you said there, it'd be still a matter of time, this disorganized chaos as Russia continues to be under Putin's grip, but perhaps now more breaking apart as yesterday. Look, we'll close it there. Sergei Erofeev, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to have you on tvpworld. Thank you.
Thank you.